I can't get a peek to the back of this rotor, but I'm going to guess that it's shredded. Hey guys, and welcome to Riggs Garage. Today we're working on this 2014 Honda Odyssey. It's got some serious grindage happening on the rear brakes. So what I'm going to do now is set up a camera and show you guys how to change the rear brakes. We're going to go ahead and do rotors and pads on this car, as long as it doesn't need anything else. Go ahead and hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching. I'll give you a quick overview of the tools that I used in this project. I used a flathead screwdriver, brake caliper compressor tool. You can rent that if you want. Socket, from top to bottom, 22mm to get the wheel off, 12mm to get the caliper bolts off, 17mm to get the caliper bracket off, the BFH to hit the rotor off of the car. To get the screw out of the rotor, we're going to use a screwdriver. If that doesn't work, use an impact driver. You can rent this. I use my impact wrench to get the wheel off. I use this pipe for leverage on my socket since I can't find my breaker bar. Brake caliper grease, you can also get this in little packets at the checkout for like 99 cents if you don't do this often. And I use anti-seize on all those bolts, so they'll come back out for the next person. I usually throw the tire under the car for some added safety. And of course I'm going to place a jack stand under the frame. Perfect. I think we got two 12mm bolts next. There's one here, one there. Make sure it's seated on there really well. Now I'm going to grab a piece of wire, a coat hanger, or a bungee strap works really well. And I'm going to hook it around the shock mount because I'm going to hang that caliper from it because we don't want to damage a brake line by hanging this heavy caliper from it. Pull this caliper off. Give a little tilt. Just kind of wiggle it loose. Remember, rubber brake line. Awesome. I'm going to hang him out of the way. There. Now we'll pull these pads out. Yeah, this one's got like 5% left. And the back one, as we expected, is complete metal on metal. Delicious. Good time to check your wheel bearings, see if there's any wobble in them. Cool. Now we'll take off the caliper bracket. This has two 17mm bolts on the back side. See one right here. Right there. This is a great place to have an impact wrench or a breaker bar. If you don't have a breaker bar, you can do what I do and use this rusty pipe. I do have a breaker bar, by the way. This is a good time to inspect these sliders to see if they are rusty or sticking, because that will cause uneven pad wear. Can't hurt just to put a spot of lube in there. To do that, you would just pull these out, like so. See, these are very greased, looking pretty decent. So pop them back in, send them down the road. One of the few reasons I don't like Hondas is because of this darn screw here that holds the rotor on. Many a time, especially if it's from a rusty place, this can be stuck in there really well. So there are a couple options of removing it. Try a screwdriver and pray for good things. Well, that doesn't help. Option 2 is to use an impact driver that basically gets screw head in, and you give this thing basically you put it in here and you give it a good whack with a hammer, and it's going to impact and hopefully loosen. Every time you hit it also gives it a slight twist, so it can pop out stuff that's stubborn. So first I'm going to try the screwdriver, put a lot of weight on it and try to get it out. First thing I did is I just went and set the parking brake so this thing can't turn. Now I can get on here and try to get it out. Alright, impact hammer it might be. Look at that. Now I'm going to put some anti-seize on this when I put it back in, so I can be nice to the next person that does this job. And I'm not going to pound it in there tight either. I'm just going to put it in just barely snug so it won't go anywhere. Of course it's not going to go anywhere with a wheel here. And this rotor is not going to go anywhere without this either. So if you have to drill it out or something horrible like that, I think you'll be fine. I've disengaged the e-brake. Now I'm going to give this a tap. This shield covers the whole back side of it except for over here where the caliper was, obviously, so I'm going to give it a tap from over here. Break it loose. Now if you're having serious trouble getting this off, Honda did build in 2 threaded holes. There's one here and one there, and I think these are M8 by 1.25 thread pitch. So you could just run a bolt in each of these and it will force this rotor off. Also, if you have these parking brakes dragging, you'll notice that there's an inspection hole here. What you can do is pop this cap off, and you can adjust with a flathead screwdriver through that hole. You can adjust the brake adjuster here. So based on the direction of the threads, if you push this down through the hole with a flathead screwdriver, it's going to contract these shoes together and release any grip that these pads have on the inside of this rotor. By the way, let's look at this rotor. Oh yeah, she is chewed up. Now a very important step is properly cleaning these new brake rotors. They do have an oil coating on them so they don't rust sitting in the warehouse. So I'm just going to use this non-chlorinated brake cleaner and give them a good blasting. And don't breathe this junk, it's bad. Also, don't forget this inner drum here where the parking brake shoes contact this drum area. It also has oil. Before you put your new rotor on, make sure your brake shoes for your emergency brake aren't all burned off. No excessive wear there. Obviously make sure they're working. And then check this hub here, make sure there's not serious rust. If there is, I would grab a wire brush, possibly on a drill, just clean everything off. Now I'm going to reinstall the rotor, and I'm going to make sure these holes line up. I'll put a little anti-seize on this screw here. Barely snug. Before I put the caliper bracket back on, I'm going to replace these guides. So basically they pry off. They do appear to be directional. There's one with a tab. There's one without a tab on this side. So think about that. I just take one off at a time and make sure they match up. A little flathead screwdriver usually does the trick. Go ahead and snap the new one in. I'll take this side off. I'm just doing one at a time so I don't forget what goes where. Now is also a really good time to make sure your pads fit in here well. They slide back and forth freely. I've seen before where there's some really bad casting marks on the end here. You have to clean it up with a file. So if it's dragging in there, feel free just to touch up with a file. Sometimes the thick powder coating also gets in the way. So I'm going to put a little bit of brake grease on these slides so that never gets caught up. Obviously you do not want this anywhere near your rotor. You can get this brake and caliper grease at your auto parts store. They also have little packets if you're just doing this once every couple years in your driveway. There's little packets for like 99 cents at the front checkout counter. I am reinstalling the caliper bracket. Put some anti-seize on the threads of these bolts. Oh, this washer fell out. It's between the knuckle and the caliper bracket. So I'm going to put it back in. I assume it has some shimming use, and I'm not going to not put it in. Now I'll lay the new pads in. Put the bottom in first. I'm kind of rolling them in. Alright, I'm compressing the cylinder back into the brake caliper. I'll show you how to do that. Use a tool just like this. You can rent it from the auto parts store or buy it for like 10 bucks. And I set a brake pad on the piston here because there's a hole here. So I set the old brake pad here and push this piston all the way back into the brake caliper. That's going to give me the room I need to fit this caliper back over the new thick pads. Coming around to the front of the van, the full level's here. The brake fluid has gone upward. If your brake fluid is getting too high, you can take a turkey baster or something like that and suck a little bit of fluid out of the top so it doesn't overflow. Remember that brake fluid will eat paint. It eats it very, very well. Also remember the brake fluid can be cleaned up with water. Once water hits it, the brake fluid dissolves. Pretty interesting. I'm going to fit the caliper over the new brake pads now. Just unwiring it. Put it right over. I'm going to push the sliders in a little bit. Set it right on. Now I'll take the 12mm bolts and hand thread those. Put this nice and snug with your ratchet. Hand thread those lug nuts on for a ways. That'll save you from cross-threading